Marriage has a way of revealing things we were never required to face alone. Not because marriage is cruel, but because it is close. Closeness removes distance. And distance, for many of us, has been a form of protection. In singleness, we often learn how to manage ourselves privately. We regulate our schedules. We choose when to engage. We choose when to withdraw. And when discomfort appears, it usually affects only us. Marriage changes that. Suddenly, your inner life no longer stays contained. Your moods shape the emotional climate of the home. Your silence communicates something, even when you intend nothing. Your unresolved feelings begin to touch someone else's experience. This is why many people feel surprised by who they become in marriage. They say things like, "I wasn't like this before," or "Marriage changed me." But marriage rarely creates new traits. More often, it exposes existing ones. Scripture speaks about the heart in this way, not as a poetic metaphor, but as the center from which responses flow. The heart holds fears, assumptions, expectations, and habits long before words appear. When two people share close emotional space, those inner realities surface. Not all at once. Often slowly. Often quietly. What once felt manageable in isolation becomes noticeable in intimacy. Impatience that rarely mattered now lands sharply. Avoidance that once felt harmless now feels like distance. Independence that once felt strong now feels inaccessible. This is not failure. It is exposure. Marriage acts like a mirror we did not know we were avoiding. And mirrors are uncomfortable, not because they accuse, but because they reveal. Many people expect marriage to be a place of rest. And in healthy ways, it can be. But marriage is also a place of formation. It forms us by removing the spaces where we hid from ourselves. In singleness, it is possible to carry unresolved patterns quietly. In marriage, those patterns begin to shape shared life. This is why emotional reactions often intensify after commitment. Not because love disappeared, but because proximity increased. Consider how conflict feels different when someone truly matters. When disagreement threatens not just harmony, but safety. When being misunderstood feels costly. This is where defensive habits emerge. Some people withdraw. Some become controlling. Some intellectualize. Some spiritualize. Some shut down emotionally while remaining present physically. These are not signs of bad character. They are signs of unexamined patterns. And marriage has a way of surfacing them. Many couples mistake this exposure for incompatibility. They assume something is wrong with the relationship itself. But often, what feels like relational breakdown is actually personal revelation. Scripture does not present growth as instant or effortless. Growth is described as gradual, refining, sometimes uncomfortable. Marriage becomes one of the primary places this refinement occurs. Not because your spouse is meant to complete you, but because intimacy reveals where completion was never the goal. When we expect marriage to heal wounds we have not examined, pressure builds silently. We begin to ask our partner to absorb things they were never meant to carry. Unspoken expectations, unresolved fears, unacknowledged pride. Marriage exposes these not to shame us, but to invite responsibility. Responsibility is not blame. It is ownership. Ownership of reactions. Ownership of patterns. Ownership of the ways we protect ourselves at the cost of closeness. This is why wisdom invites self-examination before accusation. It is easier to diagnose a spouse than to confront a habit. Easier to label than to reflect. Easier to correct than to understand. But reflection is where growth begins. When frustration repeats itself, it is rarely random. When the same arguments return in different forms, they often point to something deeper. Marriage brings this depth to the surface. It does not rush us, but it does not let us hide indefinitely either. This is where faith matters, not as a way to silence discomfort, but as a framework for maturity. Faith does not promise ease. It calls for formation, and formation often happens where resistance meets love. Marriage exposes what singleness can hide, because singleness allows distance. Marriage removes it, Distance gives us space to manage appearances. Closeness asks us to manage character. This is why some people long for escape when intimacy deepens. Not because they stopped loving, but because exposure feels threatening. When intimacy reveals fear, control often follows. When intimacy reveals insecurity, defensiveness often follows. When intimacy reveals pride, certainty often follows. None of these are permanent identities. They are signals. Signals that something within us wants attention. The danger is not exposure. The danger is refusal. When we protect self-image more than integrity, growth stalls. But when we allow marriage to function as a mirror rather than a courtroom, change becomes possible. Marriage does not ask for perfection. It asks for participation. Participation in self-awareness. Participation in emotional responsibility. Participation in growth that feels inconvenient. Before you interpret your spouse's behavior today, pause long enough to consider what this relationship may be revealing in you. Not to accuse yourself, not to diminish yourself, but to understand yourself. Because clarity is the beginning of wisdom. And wisdom is what sustains love when feelings fluctuate. Before you move on, sit with these questions. What part of yourself has marriage made difficult to ignore? How might that unexamined part be shaping the emotional safety of your relationship? And if faith is meant to form character rather than protect comfort, what is this season inviting you to learn?